If I know the pulse of South Carolina, if I know the pulse of Southern men, the great heart of the South is beating steadily to the march of Southern independence.
Governor Francis W. Pickens emerged as the man who stood at the center of the discordant storm that had been brewing between the North and South for decades. He was the figurehead who showed that there was more than idle talk backing up the endless threats. He was the one to declare the state of South Carolina the first of the 11 to secede from the federal union and establish a confederation. President Abraham Lincoln's attempt to provide supplies to Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor was the end of the line. It was the fuse that, when ignited, would explode with an earth-shattering bellow. And that fuse was lit on April the 12th, 1861. The resulting conflict would split the nation and cement the distinctive identity of the South that lingers to this very day. The struggle raged for a bloody and divisive 4 years. Its outcome forever changed Lucy, her husband, and the destiny of the 300 enslaved people who lived in me and on the land where I stood. Although she gladly sold some of the exquisite jewelry given to her by the Tsar to support the cause, Lucy was uneasy when people began to call her the Queen of the Confederacy. In appreciation, the Holcomb Legion bore her maiden name on the flag she had made from one of her blue silk ball gowns.
Death comes but once to all. Then how can a man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
But it seems that a legion of warriors was not quite enough homage to the Queen. So the Confederate Secretary of the Treasury ordered that Lucy's image was to be engraved on some of the paper currency. Now, a year and some months into the war, President Lincoln announced an executive order that struck at the very heart of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863, and it stated that all slaves were now free people. This edict became the key issue of the Civil War. Freedom is a good thing, the right action, of course. Why then was it such a difficult road for those who chose to follow it? Tom Lee, whose whole life prior to the proclamation had been devoted to the Pickens family, decided to take the road to the north. And I've heard he has family who reside there to this day. But this one man's freedom left Francis alone to contemplate the new South that appeared to him as a broken wagon wheel. Although most of the Confederate leaders had been pardoned by the federal government, Francis was not among them. His former slaves had been given the right to vote, but he no longer possessed that right himself. The world had been turned bottom rail on top. Francis was a man out of time. In the winter of 1869, he finally gave up the ghost. Former Governor Francis Wilkinson Pickens left this world a man without a country. His beloved Edgewood County was divided up to make way for a Union-led Reconstruction area. The new county, called Aiken, was to be administered by elected black statesmen supported by the federally backed Freedmen's Bureau. And although General Matthew Colbraith Butler begged for her to rent me out or sell me so she could move past her grief, her answer was a firm,
I will never, with God's help, shirk my duty or betray the sacred trust reposed in me by the noblest and best of men, my kindest and dearest husband.
Oh, but then, for the next few years, there was again the laughter that I had missed so very much. There were the gentlemen, the cousins, the nieces, and the nephews. Then there were the grandchildren of all shades of skin color who sang holiday songs again. There was so much joy, despite those particular hard times when it appeared as if I'd be lost because of mounting debts. But Lucy parted with more of her jewelry, depended on the kindness of former beaux, and always found a way to endure, to survive. Known as Mamie to her darling Dushka and Duchess to the other house servants, Cinda spent her life here reading and writing in several languages. Yes, Cinda stayed, even though she was now legally free to go. The peculiar institution of slavery had bound Lucy, Dushka, and Cinda together like a tapestry where one color blends into the next, so no one can see the shift in the yarn. And I was home to her. Dushka was always the fearless and the funny one. And for all the perilous stunts she performed on the back of a horse and her participation in the infamous ride of 1876, it somehow seemed unthinkable that a summer fever in August of 1893 suddenly ended her life. Her passing left an emptiness that could never quite be filled again for Cinda or Lucy. Lucy did give it a valiant try.
We do not forget. The vacant chair never loses its pathos and pain for us. The dear voice, silent in death, still speaks to our constant heart.
And even though Cinda had married in 1880, she found it hard to leave Lucy alone in her grief, when in fact she wasn't alone at all. My doors were open to almost any visitor who happened by. But sometimes it's only the closest of friends or the most beloved of confidants who are able to find that one gentle look, that single soft word that keeps a spirit from flickering out altogether. They both survived another 6 years. Then, almost to the very date when they had lost their Dushka, suddenly they died. Lucy on August 8th, 1899, and Cinda just 3 days later on August 11th. All that was left for me to do was wait. And that I did.